Okay, so Sean Moore. Sean Moore is the director of the Thurston EDC Center for Business and Innovation and oversees over a dozen resources to support entrepreneurs in startup and growth. Dr. Moore is also an adjunct business faculty member at the South Puget Sound Community College. His academic research focuses on responsible businesses' environmental performance. He has 15 years of management experience and has worked for responsible businesses like Patagonia. Without further ado, I will stop sharing my screen and turn it over to you, Sean.
All right, thank you very much, Paige. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. And are we seeing that okay? Thank you, Lou. All
Yep.
right, thanks everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Sean. As Paige mentioned, I'm the director of the Center for Business and Innovation at the Thurston Economic Development Council. We are located at the South Puget Sound Community College Lacey campus, down the street from St. Martin's. And we offer over a dozen resources for helping new businesses start and existing businesses grow. Those include things like the Lacey Makerspace, the Washington Center for Women in Business, the recently opened Southwest Washington Regional Agricultural Park, and statewide training programs like Scale Up and Business Enterprise Startup Training. So today I'm going to talk about responsible business structures. Before I do that, I'm just going to do a little bit of a privy into what a business structure is. And so when we're thinking about a business structure, it's basically how the federal, state, and city governments see us as a business. And so when we're thinking about business structures, the reason we have to have business structures as businesses is primarily because those federal, state, and city governments want their tax dollars. And so that's one of the primary reasons. There are other reasons too, though, including things like liability for the owners and shareholders of the business, including things like consumer protection and legal contracts and stuff like that. So there are other reasons, but the overarching reason is tax dollars. So when we're thinking about structures for businesses in Washington, these are all of the list of structures that you can file for or file articles for with the Washington Secretary of State. The only two structures that you do not need to file articles with the Washington Secretary of State are sole proprietorships and partnerships. But these are all the list of all of the different structures, including the various LLCs, corporations, nonprofit organizations, and cooperatives. When you do go to the Washington Secretary of State website and you decide that you want to create or register a business, it'll ask you what kind of business you're registering, and this is the drop-down list of those businesses. You'll notice that this list does not match that list. And that's because a lot of these structures, including all of the cooperative structures, you have to file physical paperwork rather than file online because they're much more complicated to actually file for and create in terms of a business structure. So we work with thousands of businesses every year, and usually we average about 70 to 80 new business starts per year. And the majority of the businesses that we work with choose one of these five structures. And the majority of that majority choose limited liability companies because it's the sort of best of both worlds. It is a lot simpler to manage in terms of the structure itself, and it's also much easier to file your taxes, and it gives you that important liability protection for your business. And so that's one of the major differences between these different structures is limited liability and unlimited liability. And so if you're an LLC or a corporation or a nonprofit organization and you do something to harm someone and they turn around and sue you, you are protected. Your personal assets are protected, so they can only sue the business for the business assets. And we all know that businesses get sued in America every day, so this is a real concern for a lot of businesses. Slip and falls in restaurants are a major lawsuit in America. So if you have a sole proprietorship or a partnership, you have unlimited liability. So if someone sues your business, then they can sue the business for its assets and for the business owner's personal assets. And so that limited liability structure puts a second line of defense and protects personal assets. That's very important and a very important distinction to understand with these structures. The other thing I'll mention here is the way that the federal and state governments look at this from a tax perspective. And so when we're thinking about LLCs, they're called disregarded entities by the federal government. So that means that when LLC member or owner goes to file their taxes, they actually file a personal tax return with a schedule for profit and loss. And so there's no difference between them and the business. They are the business. On the other hand, if you're a corporation or a nonprofit, now you are a regarded entity in the eyes of the IRS. And so that means that you've created a separate entity from yourself. And so you become an employee of that entity, and the taxation and everything becomes much more complex. Just going through the filings phases really quickly. So most things start with the Washington Secretary of State website. And you do create a register of business. If you're an LLC, a corporation, or a nonprofit organization, this is where you start. Then most businesses will need an employer identification number. And that's basically your federal tax ID number. And then from there, then you need state and city business licenses, and some businesses need additional licensing, like general contractors. So that's sort of the process in a nutshell. We'll leave questions at the end. If you have any questions about that process, we have a lot of no-cost resources that can take you through those steps. So let's dive into what we're supposed to be talking about today, and that's responsible business structures. And so these are business structures that mission-driven organizations choose to use, and mainly for reasons related to the values and mission of the organization. The first one we'll talk about is actually not a structure. It's a certification. It's the B Corporation certification. And so if you know your Patagonias, if you know your Ben and Jerry's, those are probably the two of the more well-known B corporations. And so this is a certification that existing corporation gets to show that it is mission-driven. And so basically it demonstrates to stakeholders and shareholders that you stand for a certain set of values, and you've gone through a process to say and to prove that you do stand for those values. When we're thinking about B Corp certification, you do have to be a corporation. That's the first requirement. You have to be in business for more than a year as a corporation. And then you do have to go through a fairly rigorous process. There's fees attached to that process. There's also an annual renewal fee that's based on sort of a sliding scale based on the amount of revenue your business generates. I think at the top level, if your Patagonias, you pay $50,000 a year to maintain this B Corp certification. You also have to put out an annual impact report as part of the B Corp certification requirements. And so this is a report that basically tells your stakeholders and shareholders what you're doing, and your impacts and the good stuff that you did throughout the year. I'm not sure if anybody's seen one of these. Patagonia has a really good one, but it's something that comes out on people's websites every year, but it's a requirement of the B Corp certification process and to maintain B Corp certification. The good things about B Corp certification is, again, it does show that you do have these values as a business. It does enhance your reputation. It shows that you want to be accountable for your business, and you want to make sure that you are really communicating the impact of your business to your shareholders and to your stakeholders. And that's an important distinction there, because when you're a mission-driven organization, you don't care just about your shareholders or the people that own stock in your business. You care about all of the different communities and global impacts you have in the world, and those are all the stakeholders of the business. So another thing that a B Corp certification sort of communicates to folks is that you are sort of putting purpose over profit, which is an important thing to understand. If a person is interested in purchasing something from you, they may have a value that aligns with your corporation's values, and they may choose you over a different company. Some of the things that are not so great about B Corp certifications are that, again, there's that ongoing fee and assessment. You have to do a reassessment every 3 years, the annual impact report. Again, it's not a legal structure. Recently, the B Corporation certification has come under some fire. I think that Dr. Bronner's stated that they will not be recertifying as a B Corp because they believe that the process has become tainted and that the corporations that are greenwashing are being B Corp certified. I think that especially that was directed at corporations like Nespresso that were certified. The B Lab, who does the B Corp certification, has responded to this and is increasing their requirements for B Corp certification. And so it seems like this is all going to blow over, and it'll be all good in the long run. Okay, so second responsible structure I want to talk about is the social purpose corporation. And so the social purpose corporation, or SPC, is a designation that you can have if you are a business starting in Washington or in California or in Florida. Those are the only three states with this social purpose corporation structure. And when you do file as a social purpose corporation, it is indeed a structure. When you file as an SPC, that's what goes at the end of your name. Instead of Inc. or Corp, it's SPC, or Social Purpose Corporation. So this is something that you can, in Washington State, you can file through the Secretary of State. There are no other requirements for doing so. Basically, it's, again, stating that you're mission driven, you're putting mission above profit. And the benefit of a SPC, or social purpose corporation, is that you can operate like a corporation. So you can have investors, and so you can raise capital through investments, and offers the limited liability that's so important to the shareholders and to the people involved in the business. And so it's a good way to show that you are, mission driven without all of the headaches of a nonprofit. And companies like Patagonia have demonstrated that profit and responsibility don't have to be two different things. They can work hand in hand with one another. So it's important to think that a business, can be profitable and still be responsible. SPCs don't really have the recognition of the B Corp certification just because it's only in those three states. So it's not something that's super well known. And again, there's not really any other benefit other than stating you're mission driven. So a lot of clients ask me, well, if I register as an SPC, do I get any tax benefits? And the answer is no. You get treated just like a regular corporation. So it's really just self-certifying that you are mission driven. Okay, next one is our nonprofit organization structures. And so this, again, is a structure that you file with the Secretary of State, and that's as a nonprofit corporation in Washington. There are additional things that you have to do to become a 501c3, and that would be filing specific forms to apply for tax exempt status with the Internal Revenue Service. That process can be long, it can be 3 to 6 months. There are a bunch of different 501Cs. There's the most common ones are 501c3s, 4s, 6s, and 7s, but there's a lot more than that. Just at my organization, we have two different nonprofits under the same roof. We have a 501c4 and a 501c3. The major benefit and the reason why the majority of nonprofits elect to be 501c3s is because they can receive donations that the donors can then claim as deductions on their personal taxes. And so there's a benefit to the nonprofit and a benefit to the donor. The other reason 501c3 designation is really popular is because you get access to grants, potential grant funding that for-profit organizations or other 501Cs don't get. And so the majority of the federal, state, city foundational grants that are out there, the 501c3 status is a requirement to apply for that grant. So it does open a whole sort of window of funding streams that aren't available to for-profit organizations. 501(c)(3)s or fours or fives or sixes are usually mission-driven organizations. And so they're really legally required to operate for public benefit. Um, there are some negatives to becoming a nonprofit, and I live in that world. And so one of the negatives is that basically if you're starting a business and one of your main goals is profit, then you should not choose a nonprofit because none of that profit can go to the owners. You can get paid a reasonable salary, but that money has to be reinvested back into the nonprofit. It can't be paid in dividends to any of the shareholders or stakeholders or owners or boards of directors or anything like that. So the filing process through the IRS can take a long time. The other thing here is that when you're going after these federal and state grants specifically, there's a whole new set of accounting requirements that come up. And so especially when you're working with federal grants at the nonprofit level, it's a whole different type of accounting and it's a lot more rigorous. If you make over a certain revenue threshold, I believe it was $750,000, it might have gone up to 1 million in revenue as a nonprofit each year, then you have to pay to have this painful single audit done every year. So you pay an auditor like $20,000 or $30,000 to come into the organization and basically torture you for 2 or 3 months just to maintain that 501(c) status. And so that's one of the negative things is the accounting gets a lot more complex a lot more quickly. And there's just a lot more moving parts with nonprofits. You're required to have a board of directors, and that board of directors is required to meet on a regular basis. And you have to have minutes for the meeting that are stored for 3 or 5 years. And so there's just a lot of moving parts with it. And so really when I'm working with clients that want to start a nonprofit, I want to make sure that they know what they're getting themselves into when it comes to the accounting and to, the grant management and also understanding that the benefits sometimes don't outweigh those negatives in terms of the operations. Now, if there are public and private funding that is out there for your specific mission that you can access, then it's a great way to access that funding that wouldn't be available to regular for-profit organizations. Okay, next, we'll talk about cooperatives. And so this is, one of my favorite structures. I think it's one of the more equitable structures out there. It's becoming more and more popular. Every day I hear more and more buzz about cooperatives. And so it's something that, I'm excited about. And I know that you guys have a lot of curriculum there that's related to cooperatives through the Northwest Cooperative Development Center. So that's awesome. So let's just talk about some of the different types of cooperatives before we talk about the pros and cons. And so one type of cooperative is the consumer cooperative. And so basically it's the consumers or become the members of the cooperative. REI is a great example of a consumer cooperative. The food co-op in Olympia is an example of a consumer cooperative. Worker cooperatives are basically when employees who work in the business own the business. And there is a difference between employee ownership and a worker cooperative. Specifically, worker cooperatives are the owners of the business. They don't just own shares in it. And so this is a great way to create a democratic workplace. It's becoming a very popular exit strategy for business owners that are sort of retiring out of their businesses and don't have anyone to pass the business on to. It's a great way to overcome a lot of the human resource issues that we're seeing businesses facing in this day and time. And so Orca Books down there in downtown, I think is a worker cooperative, if I'm not mistaken. Producer cooperatives. So these are independent producers that come together, and so they basically create this larger market and they sell in larger in larger bundles. So farmers are, common for creating producer cooperatives, artists, craftspeople. Some of the more famous producer cooperatives in our areas are like Tillamook's, a very large producer cooperative, or Ocean Sprays, a really big producer cooperative. Financial cooperatives, and these are your credit unions, like your Twin Stars. And so this is when the members are the owners of the financial institution. Again, when it comes to equity, this is a very important concept, and it just opens the door for more financial equity. Purchasing cooperatives, this is when organizations come together to be able to get bulk purchases and get discounts on supplies, being able to control supply chains. Ace Hardware is a good example of a purchasing cooperative, and that's how they've been able to stay in business and compete with the Lowe's and the Home Depots of the world, is because they're pooling those resources and being able to get the same pricing as those large big box stores do. Multi-stakeholder cooperatives. So this is a mixture of workers, consumers, and community members coming together. This is often a common cooperative in healthcare and elderly care. Housing cooperatives are when basically residents come together in a cooperative, form a corporation. The corporation owns the entire housing complex, and then each person is sort of designated a place to live, but they don't really own it. It does, again, create equity and create lower pricing for homes. I think there's a few of these in Seattle. I think one of them, let me just, can't remember what the name of it is. It is the Puget Ridge in West Seattle is an example of a housing cooperative. Okay, so good things about cooperatives. So they're very democratic ownership. So every member gets one vote. So this really creates equal power among the people involved in the cooperative. It's a great way for, to build equity and wealth and to distribute wealth evenly. It's definitely a value-based model, so it's great for, social justice, for equity goals, for mission-driven organizations. There are some downsides to cooperatives, though, and they do require a lot more paperwork to file. And there's a lot more complexity in the beginning of cooperatives in terms of operating agreements. You definitely need to have a lawyer involved, which can get expensive really quickly. So the setup and management of it is really much more complex than any of the other structures. Because everyone has an individual vote, it can really slow down the process of getting things done. And you don't see the same access that capital corporations have in terms of shareholders. So those are some of the negative things that we see with cooperatives. We were instrumental in starting the Southwest Washington Growers Cooperative in partnership with the Southwest Washington Food Hub. That's a cooperative that we incubated and has grown immensely, so we're pretty proud of that. If you're interested in employee cooperatives or worker-owned cooperatives, then there is an organization in Washington called the Washington Center for Employee Ownership. And they specialize in forming and helping organizations form employee-owned cooperatives. Again, this is a very becoming very popular with folks retiring out of businesses. Again, also a great way for artists to be able to pool resources if they want to get a gallery together, this or a producer-owned cooperative. So it's a great upcoming structure that I think it has a lot of promise for the future of business. Of course, you're familiar with the Northwest Cooperative Development Center, and so they pair with Evergreen to create training for you folks over there. So they're a great resource in Olympia. And then also the Northwest Agricultural Business Center has a lot of cooperative resources that can help specifically food businesses join cooperatives or start cooperatives. So the question is why to choose a responsible business structure? What would be the reason? And of course, for mission alignment, so that's one of the first and foremost things that you want to think about is if you do have a mission-driven organization, if you are prioritizing social or environmental responsibility, then you definitely want to let everyone know that. And so choosing a responsible structure is a good idea in that situation. We all know that there are whole segments of consumers that are responsible consumers. So we have green consumers and socially responsible consumers, and they are going to be more drawn to your business if you have a responsible business structure that will create more sort of market communication to that segment that you are indeed a responsible business and that we want to have you as a customer. Responsible businesses attract talent. And so, in this day and age, human resources are so important. And so attracting talent is a really key to success in business today. And responsible businesses attract the best people. Patagonia, for example, when a corporate job at the Ventura location in Patagonia gets posted, they see over 1,000 applications for that job. So people want to work for good companies. And those good people make those good companies better. Um, Responsible structures also are important to ensure that when we're thinking about the involvement of shareholders in corporations, that the mission and values don't take a back seat to the profit for the shareholders. We're seeing sort of this in real life right now with Unilever and Ben and Jerry's. Unfortunately, Unilever purchased Ben and Jerry's, several years ago, and everything seemed to be going okay. And Ben and Jerry's was allowed to keep their own board of directors and keep on their mission and keep doing business as usual. That seems to be changing now, and so there's always that profit versus sort of mission battle going on. And so that's something to consider, and responsible structures inherently will help to stop that from happening. But also there's also bylaws and operating agreements that need to be done to make sure that mission is always put over the profit. So of course, for nonprofits, you can access unique funding resources and grants and foundational stuff. Again, these structures really do lend to equity and shared ownership, and creating family wage and living wage jobs. And surprise, businesses that are responsible in the long term usually are more resilient and usually have longer lives and do better. And so doing good business ends up actually really relating to responsibility and doing good business. Okay, so other ways. So you don't necessarily have to have a responsible structure to show that you are a responsible business. There's all of these certifications out there, like fair trade certifications. You can be a 1% for the planet participant. So there's other ways to show you're responsible, and it doesn't necessarily have to be related to your structure. Okay, so I'm going to talk about how we can help, and then we'll dive into all of the questions you have around this topic. So first and foremost, we offer an Intro to Business course at no cost in 5 different languages. This is available online on demand, or it is available through a monthly instructor-led webinar. So if you are interested in starting a business, then this is a good first step. It presents you with 8 steps to starting a business, and helps you to understand which structure is going to be right for you. We do have a green business startup training that's also no cost and online and on demand. So if you're interested in starting an environmentally responsible business, this is a great first step to start to understand the specifics around a green business start. We do have a next step business enterprise startup training course that dives into structures even further, along with business plan writing and intellectual property protection, accounting for startups. This is a good sort of baseline for helping to gain the understanding of, 5 of the sort of important things you need to know about starting a business. And then we also offer no-cost advising through our Washington Center for Women in Business and through our Small Business Development Center. And so if you or anyone you know is interested in starting one of these responsible structures, we can definitely help you with no-cost advising, walk you through what the process is, which structure is going to be the right structure for you, and just help with general business guidance. This is our sort of air traffic control here. And so if you want to reach us, go to businessresources.thurstonedc.com. Paige will be sending out this slide deck, I imagine, to you. So you'll have all of this information in that slide deck. We do also have a calendar of events that basically has all of our resources along with a bunch of outside resources that we think are going to be valuable for new entrepreneurs and growing entrepreneurs. And so we have the calendar of events, and all of these things are mostly free except the makerspace stuff. You have to pay for those classes. All right, there's the contact information. So again, this slide deck will go out. And so if you have, any questions or you have any more interest in talking about this, let us know and we're happy to help. And we will dive into questions.